Well, welcome back to the Stealth Lounge. Apologies to the not so many of you who may have cared enough about the pilot episode, but the truth is, I don't know. I think it was that intro. The terrible image that was obviously customized by me on my phone was unattractive on its own, but to disgrace the Metal Gear Solid series even further by slapping their theme song behind it, in 8-bit resolution no less, made it a lot worse. Otherwise, I think the video went okay. I stand by everything I said, and I'd say it all again. So anyways, now that I'm finally back over 7 months later with a successor, what am I going to talk about now? You may be thinking Metal Gear, or Hitman, Stealth Bastard, or even Thief Simulator. Well, the latter two I've yet to play, but I'm gonna. Being a single father really takes a toll on my free time, so patience definitely has to be a virtue for me when it comes to new games. But with that said, I'm covering a relatively short game that perfectly illustrates just how much free time I have. This is I Am Bread. Now you're probably thinking, Fearless, this is the Stealth Lounge and this is not a stealth game. And you have a point there. I mean, Wikipedia puts this game in the action-adventure category. But you know the saying you can't trust Wikipedia? Well, actually, you can in this regard. But you see here in the Stealth Lounge, we can cover real stealth games, and we can also cover what I like to call spiritual stealth games. And I Am Bread is exactly the embodiment of what I define that category as. Spiritual stealth games are games that are not by design intended for stealth play, it just sort of happens by accident. I love when this happens, because it gives me more bang for my buck. So in this game, you assume control over a slice of bread, and your objective is to become toast. Yeah, not the greatest concept for a game that's identified as action-adventure in my opinion, but it is unique. And really, that was what convinced me to try it out. This game is divided into several different rooms, where the objective is always the same, become toast. Despite the simplicity of this, it is a rather tedious goal to say the least. I mean, outside of the defiance of basic physics, such as sticking to walls, breaking almost anything that isn't furniture with your bare crust, and skateboarding, the tediousness comes from the controls. Now I'm playing this game with my DualShock 4 controller from the PlayStation 4, so I can't really speak on behalf of PC players who may be using a keyboard and mouse if that's available, but this is by far the most unappealing feature about this game. I played the tutorial first because I figured it wasn't going to be as simple as it looks, and no, it isn't. It's far worse. I don't think the tutorial even understands the game's concept of a possessed and seemingly suicidal slice of bread. I'm not even sure how to describe this layout. It's just so insane to me. I'm fairly certain my brain just associated whatever my eyes were seeing, but I don't trust myself enough to make that claim that I fully understand the control layout. My brain was probably just winging it the whole time. I don't know. So, you might be asking yourself, what kept me going? Well, this game has a story, believe it or not. Now, it's a pretty bare bones story as far as concept is concerned, but the level of detail in the on-screen text to form the bigger picture of the narrative of this game was what kept me going. That's not to say the story is good, it's just goofy enough to where despite not knowing how you got here as a slice of bread, being able to move on your own whim, you have to know how you're getting out. We'll come back to that later. But first, let me address why this game qualifies as a spiritual stealth game. The first and arguably the biggest piece of evidence to support this claim that I have are the environments. As I stated earlier, defying the laws of physics because a slice of bread moving on its own just wasn't insane enough on its own apparently, almost any object you come into contact with can break. The floor can be wet, or the sinks can be full of water. There's trash cans that are instant deaths, dirt all over the place that corrupts the quality of the finished product once toasted. Yeah, by the way, your toast quality is your score at the end of each room. The fact that you can theoretically avoid all these insane hazards to obtain a 100% quality toast means you have to be stealthy.
Oh, wait, that's oh, don't touch the vase. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Don't. Oh, you touched it. Don't fall. Don't fall. Okay. Okay. It's tempting. It's tempting. Don't touch it. Oh my gosh. It went over the ledge.
That alone qualifies this title for the category, but there's more. You also have to be creative with how you get toasted. The room that the game starts you out in is quite naturally the kitchen. And the first thing you see is a toaster across the way. So naturally you're thinking, okay, I need to get to that toaster, right? Well, I've tried several times, and for the life of me, I can shake the damn thing, but I cannot get inside this slot. I just can't. Or rather, I could if I was an obsessive sociopath that wasn't also a conformist, but who's to say I can't just use the stovetop here, like the perpetual lazy ass that I am? Nobody, that's who. So that's exactly what I did. Voila. And that's pretty much the gameplay. Variation primarily came from the expansions, which allow you to assume control over bagel slices or crackers. The objectives are different, as you race with one and then you hunt cheese with the other, but I found myself disinterested in these modes, particularly because they have no story to them, which was what led me to start playing the original mode in the first place. There's variation in the maps. You have a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, a garage, and so on and so forth. Now you're thinking, why would there be a loaf of bread anywhere besides the kitchen? Well, again, that's where the story comes in. So here's the story. Mr. Merton, a failed businessman who is divorced, starts becoming distressed when he starts coming home to see his residence has apparently been broken into, and leaving behind slices of toasted bread, which he interprets as some form of symbolic warning. As this continues on, he starts becoming suspicious, and starts telling his therapist that he suspects a supernatural force is at play. The more details he gives, the more his therapist starts to fear the worst for his patient. He starts putting the loaf of bread into different rooms to root out whether or not the bread is assuming a life of its own. Eventually, this pattern happens in enough rooms where he has no other suspect besides the loaf of bread. According to the story cards, he eventually gets committed because who the hell would take this story seriously, right? He escapes and, well, the game ends with him and the bread in a moving vehicle, so really, there's not many directions you can take this ending. Really, this story, despite being told in text form and not narration, is really the only feature that kept me going. You have timers in each map, but they never amount to anything except leaderboard status, and if your intention here is a stealth run like mine, then you need to just forget it even exists. It has no bearing on the story, in fact, nothing honestly does. This game has a mystique that I've never seen before. Despite the environments being relatively open, the story is immensely linear. If they were going to take it in that direction, I would have preferred some cutscenes instead of some patient profile documents. They're already insulting my intelligence by having me take control of a food product, which frankly is quite boring on its own concept, so having some sort of visual log of Mr. Merton's breakdown and commitment into the psych ward would have provided the edge of incentive for this possessed loaf to keep fucking with his mind. I found myself pondering more about why the loaf of bread was that dedicated to screwing with Merton's mind than how it is able to do so in the first place. Given the game's asinine controls and piss-poor camera maneuverability, I have to say I don't think I care enough at this point. Whatever issues Merton and this loaf have with each other is best left to the developers to explain. The onus is on them. My time is better spent elsewhere. I think I'd even be satisfied if all they told us was what brand of loaf this was, so I know which one to watch out for when I go grocery shopping. I'd mention the music, but frankly, it's not even worth going into if you don't pay attention to the story, because the story is the only thing that makes the music in this game slightly fitting. In any case, I can't say I'd recommend this game recreationally because it's twisted in all sorts of ways. It's definitely more fitted for drinking parties, I'll give it that. Since I don't drink myself, however, I'm just left with the mold. I'm giving this a headline of not worth the dough. If they allow the central character that gets the narrative to actually have a physical role in the game, where we are actually swapping between him and the loaf, then I can see this game having better standing from a conceptual standpoint, but as it is, it has enough to make it about as worthy as a demo, but as a full-fledged game, where you waste more than 1 minute of your time on it, you can just hear it crying to be given more character, and even more ways to tell its story. Alright, until next time, make sure your mental well-being is treated properly before your next slice of toast. Later.